something go right over the top of us that looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast. We just had something go right over the top of us that looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast.
As many viewers know, I have researched the Mars rover program with a very critical eye, and I conclude that the evidence does not convince me that the Mars rovers are on Mars. I suspect they may have never left the Earth. I recently spent some time updating my hypothesis document, which is now some 100 pages long. On today's show, I discuss the new hypothesis with Andrew Johnson. The jury is very much still out on this one. Warning, this show has quite a high nerd rating. But that's okay, because I suspect there are many Richplanet viewers who might be described as closet nerds. We've discussed some of NASA's projects at length on Richplanet in previous shows, including the Mars rover program. These are unmanned robots which, according to NASA, are roaming around the surface of Mars and occasionally sending back pictures. In 2014, I published a paper entitled The Mars Rover Hypothesis, which examines whether or not the Mars rovers really are on Mars and evidence suggesting they possibly never left the Earth. I have recently updated the hypothesis with significant new evidence, and here to discuss the work is Richplanet stalwart Andrew Johnson. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for inviting me, Richard.
Now then, when I put this hypothesis out, and people can see our interviews from these links on the screen, and they can download the new hypothesis from the link on the screen, I was contacted by two scientists, and they went through a lot of the evidence in the document, and they were casting doubt over a lot of the evidence. So what we're going to do first is just look at some of the evidence that we put forward, or I put forward, also to mention Douglas Gibson. He's been involved in this research as well, that we think now is probably not so strong, or has been taken out of the hypothesis altogether. Because I've listed some of the evidence that's been removed from the hypothesis because it's effectively been explained. The first was the moving artifacts image. This was a photograph, we can see it here in the image, where it appeared that some of the rocks were in different positions in different images, and it was shown fairly easily that this was just due to parallax, a parallax problem with the camera. The other piece of evidence, which I've completely removed from the hypothesis, was an image called the self-portrait of curiosity.
Yes.
And this is because the image, it does seem to have been stitched together from a mosaic of lots of other images.
Yes.
So what was suggested was, well, how could something possibly take a photograph of itself?
Yes.
Now, perhaps still in the ambiguous category, but I've moved these two images to the appendix, so they're not part of the main hypothesis, but I've left them in there. The first one is the piece of wood image, which I know that you're familiar with.
Yes, indeed.
So if you just remind us about that image, Andrew.
Yes, well, I mean, when I first saw this image a few years ago, it did, to me, look like a plank of wood, basically, that had kind of partly rotted, and that was primarily because of its shape and the texture of it and the length of it, and it did seem to have squared off edges. But I think from what you'd put in the document there are some additional segments of that same image, just I think a few sort of feet away, aren't there, where you're seeing similar features.
Yeah, so we see there a much wider image of the landscape where there appears to be other objects which have the same surface texture.
Yes.
Right, to the right there, which isn't the same shape with squared off edges. So
right. So it could just be that it's happened to be a lump of rock that's broken off of that, which looks like a 3x2 lump of wood. But again, what we can say is that we know that these rover images are capable of taking colour pictures, and this discussion that we're having now would have been aided by having a colour picture, because then if it were, we could see whether it was wood coloured or whether it was less wood coloured, but we can't because it's only black and white.
Another image which I've taken out of the main hypothesis and moved into the appendix, but still in the document, was what we've termed the walrus arm bone, which a close-up, we'll just put that on the screen, looks at first sight very much like a bone. Again, one of the scientists that contacted me actually did a calculation on the size, and he pointed out quite rightly that one of the first things you should try and do is ascertain what is the size of the thing that you're looking at.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
And he did that by looking at the imprints of the tyres, well, they're not tyres, the wheels.
The wheels, yeah, with
of the Rover.
Yeah.
75 millimeters, as we see there. So the item in the image there is probably, maybe I would say, less than 7.5 centimeters long. So it's it's not
big enough for a
to
leg
be a,
joint
to
of
be
a
a leg,
walrus.
a walrus. So, and he actually said in his text, and don't even go down the avenue of calling it a baby seal bone.
But that's exactly what it obviously is. What else could it possibly be? It's a baby walrus arm bone. There's no question about that. It's amongst a load of other bones.
Yeah.
It's way too perfect.
Out of all the arguments, when we looked on the previous show, I was under the impression that it was a bone of some sort. There's no way a rock forms like that.
But it just looks way too much like a walrus arm bone, which is one of the very few bones you would find on Devon Island. That is a huge coincidence. You're talking about, I mean, how many bones are there in animals across this world, and how many would you find on Devon Island? You're talking about 1 in 100,000.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm still under the impression that belongs to a walrus, personally.
Exactly. To me, that looks like a picture from Devon Island that they didn't properly cover up.
Like we've mentioned in previous shows, every image from Mars is doctored by a private company before it is released.
Well, possibly a private company. We don't even know whether it's just a front for security services or whatever. We don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But either way, that is a walrus arm bone. You can see it from the pictures of a walrus skeleton.
Yeah.
It's way too perfect. You can see where the ligament would have been. You can see where the tendons were.
Yeah.
That's a bone. There's no question about that. To call it anything else is just complete madness. And that's why he's saying, don't even go down the road. Well, what would a baby walrus arm bone be?
Yeah.
It would be 7.5 centimeters. That's what it would be.
Because it's a baby.
Yeah, I mean, it's just... what explanation do you have for it looking exactly like a walrus's arm bone?
Yeah.
You know, he hasn't provided any reason.
No.
So, yeah, no, I can't go along with that at all.
Right. But if we look at a wider shot of that, I think I'm inclined to accept this, that there are lots of fragments of rocks of all different kinds of random shapes, and they clearly are rocks in that image. So I'm
If you ask me, that's a walrus graveyard where they've smashed the skulls up to get the tusks out.
Get the marrow
All
out.
the stuff on the left is stones. There's no similarity between that and the bit
There's
where
nothing that looks like that, is
Exactly.
there? There's nothing that
that
resembles
is
it.
bone in the middle around the square,
Yeah.
and the stuff around the side is just bits of rock. It's completely different. I mean, that is where someone's killed a walrus.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
happy to accept that may just be a rock and not a bone. So as I say, they've been moved into the appendix. There's many changes to this document. Some of it as a result of the information given to me by these two scientists. I've added some new sections into the hypothesis, Andrew. I'll just run through them. Microbial life images, ventifacts and unexplained features, sand dunes, LiDAR, radio signals, and the landing. Another thing that I've taken out is I was comparing the Spirit and Opportunity rovers with
Mobility scooters.
a mobility scooter. And it was pointed out that, well, mobility scooters are designed to travel several miles in one charge, whereas the rover will only go a few meters. It moves very short distances. Now, there's a lot of hardware on these rovers, and if you were to operate them all simultaneously, it would be quite a load. But I understand that it's done in a very conservative fashion. So the amount of current or power that the devices draw, including the motors on the wheels, is very small relative to a mobility scooter. So they're saying it's not a fair comparison.
Yeah.
So I've taken that comparison out. But I do still ask questions about whether the lithium-ion batteries that are on Spirit and Opportunity could have really lasted for 10 years without having significant reduction in performance.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, we can, point out that the conditions on Mars, according to what we're told, rather more hostile to battery technology than they are on Earth. So, a laptop battery, as you say, lasting 10 years on Earth. I mean, a laptop doesn't draw that much current. So, but yet a laptop will only last for 5 minutes when the battery is, basically no good.
Mm-hmm.
So how are these lasting on a charge from solar panels, which are, that much further away from the sun, etc., etc.?
All right, well, we come to another photographic image, which is PIA 16204. And as soon as you see this image, you think, well, that's some kind of rodent. It's a lemming, or it's what have you. Now, both the scientists said that they thought it was just a rock that had caught the light.
What? What? That's a rock. Well, it's got nose, eyes, ears, fur.
And
You
feet.
can see pink bits where the feet are. It's got a collar where a collared lemming would be,
Yeah.
and you think it's a rock. I mean,
Of course they would say that because, it's an easy get out, isn't it?
that's one hell of a rock.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen a rock that looks remotely like that. It's even got white around above and below the eye.
Yeah. It's for me. I'm still convinced that's a rodent, personally.
I still think that's a collared lemming, personally.
Yeah.
I mean, you can even tell by the way it's looking ahead and what it's doing. It's on the move. It's sniffing around. The two pictures they've chosen of lemmings, and they've chosen completely different background. That's not even a collared lemming.
No, it's a normal lemming and
lemming.
a prairie dog, which is a completely different shape, and it
prairie
has a
dog
larger tail
is a completely
and larger arms.
Yeah, much bigger legs. Yeah. It's just to me that's a lemming.
Light in a certain way to make it look like that. Now, interestingly, one of these scientists was able to give me another high-definition image of that group of rocks on a different day, about 3 weeks apart, from a different angle. And obviously, if it's a rodent, it's not going to be there in this other image, so it should be completely absent. Now, so I've included that image in the new hypothesis. Now, it's not that straightforward, because initially this scientist, I believe he misidentified the rocks, which I put in one of my previous lectures. This is the correct identification, I believe, which is shown in these two drawings. So the important rocks are rocks 1, 2 and 3, and the anomaly is between rocks number 2 and 3. So
Yes.
if we just look at this close-up image of them side by side.
Yes, and I mean, as you said in your lecture, Richard, that you do have to look at this carefully. And, I was looking at this in your document when I was going through it a few days ago. And I was probably looking at this pair of images for something like 10 minutes so I could orientate what was being illustrated in my own mind to, so it's not something you can just do instantly, because as we've already said, these images were taken days apart. The rover's in a slightly different position, the light's different, the size of the rocks in each image is somewhat different. So you do have to look at the rock field fairly carefully and kind of do a bit of 3D space, analysis in your brain to work out what it.
Completely different rocks.
I can't understand how they're the same.
I know
rock.
we're looking at it from a different angle, from the other side, but the size of the rocks are completely different. It's a completely different set of rocks.
I just can't understand how they think that number 2 is the same rock in both those pictures. that where they've written the two isn't even. I mean, it's difficult to say, but I suppose it's possible that face, but the way it sort of comes down like that.
Yeah, but how do you account for the sand in the middle?
Where's the shadow? I suppose there is a tiny bit of shadow.
The sand in the middle is completely filling the void.
Could be.
There's a void. There's a clear void there. With if it was not a lemming, there would be a rock. But there should be a rock in between 2 and 3, regardless of what angle you look at it from.
And then there's the other question of why one's red and the other one's yellow. What exactly has happened to Mars in between the two pictures?
Yeah.
Something horribly dangerous and colour related has happened. I mean,
I'm not sold yet. I still think it's a lemming.
To me, the one on the right looks like they've tried to yellowify it and make it. It just basically looks like a Chinese sauce.
Yeah.
I mean, it's completely. It just looks like a beach.
It's laughable that they would actually send that and suggest that they are the same rocks.
But, I mean, just looking around at other rocks, it's just so completely.
It's a lot sandier, the revised image as well. There's a lot more sand there. It's a lot dustier. A lot
horribly
sand.
Indistinct.
Yeah.
And particularly the one on the left. I mean, really, we should run that through some sort of AI, but then that's just going to mess it up.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what happens when we move on.
Is being shown.
So in the image there, rock 2 is marked. That's the same rock in each image from a different angle at a different day, and also rock 3. So the question we must ask, it appears that there is sand banked up on rock number 3. Is that sand, or is it actually the back of another rock, which is making up the rock that we see in the middle, or the anomaly that we see in the middle, which looks like a rodent? Now, if you look along the profile here, the sand does seem to follow, or rock, if it's a rock, the same profile as some kind of rodent. But is that what we're looking at? Do you make a judgment, Andrew?
Well, I mean, I was, when I looked at this, and I said I did look at it for a number of minutes, and it does look like that rock, which is meant to be a rodent, has moved out of the way. I'd like to make me more comfortable in my own mind. I'd like to see some sort of computer model made, but that would probably take a couple of weeks of work at least.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd probably be possible to do it from these images, and maybe there might be another one that could be added in. But it's a complicated process. But I would like to see that done before I was convinced. But before I was 100% convinced. But looking at the two images we have, I'd say yes, it does look like the alleged rodent does seem to be not present in the
Right.
second image.
Right, and there is another more conspiratorial angle which may have happened that I suggest in the document, and that is that the first image there on the left has been released. The NASA or whoever have realised they haven't airbrushed it out, so they've deliberately taken an image from another angle, and they've made the sand look like this similar shape to create ambiguity. Now that might sound very contrived, and perhaps it is, but I just put it in there as a possibility.
Yeah. Yes.
But if it can be proven that the anomaly, which looks like a rodent on the left, definitely isn't in the second image, to me that's fairly smoke and gun evidence. But as you say, a 3D model would be useful.
Yes.
All right.
So if we've got any volunteers out there, then be our guest and
Yes.
See what you can come up with.
Yeah. Now the next image, which one of the scientists said was just geology, that these what I asserted might be some sort of vertebrae from a creature. It does look like a vertebrae, but one of the points that was noted was, well, if that's a vertebrae, what's the object at the very left of the screen there? If what's on the right of the screen is some sort of vertebrae, then is what's on the left of the screen also the remains of some animal? And if it is, what is it? Because I think he was saying, well, what's on the left there is geology. So why isn't what's on the right geology? And he also points to a wider image. This
But that,
one,
I mean, that argument there is somewhat weak, if you ask me, because if that is some type of fossilised animal, then it may part of it may have been washed away, in some river, or it could have been moved by some other process which has happened, wind erosion, or the rock has just split apart and fallen on top of it. So saying that bit looks like a bone and that bit next to it doesn't, therefore the whole thing isn't, to me would be a weak argument.
Yeah. Well, what he said is that the whole thing is geology, and it's been made by the process of wind erosion and the creation of what they call ventifacts, which we're going to come on
about
to.
that, yeah.
Wind erosion in an atmosphere that's 0.6% of Earth.
And wind erosion that creates formations that are similar and in line.
I just can't see that. To me, that definitely still is far more likely to be a vertebrae.
Yes.
And once again, we have to come back to the fact that of all the bones in all the world, one of the very few kinds of bones you could find would be whale vertebra that just happens to look exactly like would find on Devon Island.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a crocodile. It doesn't look like
A tiger.
yeah, exactly, or a camel, or any of these things. It looks like a whale that would have been
Regional to Devon Island.
pulled up by some hunters, cut to bits,
Yeah.
taken all the blubber out, whatever they on the oil,
And left the carcass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, many years ago. as
What are
well.
the chances of it looking exactly like that?
Yeah, it's a poor argument. I agree with what they're saying.
And there's an image of a ventifact in the Arctic.
But that's in full atmosphere,
Yeah.
where the wind. Okay, I mean, so just to be clear, so the wind would have to blow 8 times as fast to give the same pressure, roughly speaking. But I mean, you're still talking about the wind carries humidity, it carries
Sediment, it carries all.
heavy. It's much more capable of carrying bigger bits of sand on Earth, which can wind things away. I would also question the fact as to what that really is.
It's very odd looking.
It's got a very sort of nasally, eyebally kind of.
It looks like a hip joint to me.
It almost looks like a skull. I mean, but either way,
So this is what NASA have sent.
we're only hypothesizing that the wind did that. We don't actually know because we weren't there before it happened.
No.
I mean, is that really possible that the wind made a hole with leaving a bit like that? It's possible, I guess.
Possible, yes. Oh, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but it's very convenient for them to send something like that.
Either way, there's no regularity like there is in the.
No.
It's
There's no repeatability. That is nowhere near a spinal vertebrae comparison.
It's not even close. There's nothing about that suggests that it could create something so regular.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes, and I mean, you can,
Antarctic.
that almost looks like some type of skull, doesn't it, from that angle? So yes, you can see the point. But then again, we get onto the whole argument of if the atmospheric density on Mars is what is alleged to have been, there is some question as to how much erosive force would be produced by such an atmosphere. So
and how much sand can that atmosphere carry?
supports, in the lower gravity. Maybe can it support more because it's lower gravity, and the atmospheric pressure is that much lower. We don't have. I don't know. Maybe there are some scientific papers on that which we haven't. And if anybody can find those and wants to send them to us, great. If it gives us more information, fantastic.
Okay. The next image is something that Douglas Gibson pointed out, which appears to show 2 egg-shaped objects which have perhaps been broken. And the question is, are we looking at 2 eggshells from eggs which have perhaps hatched open?
Possibly. I looked at this image and I felt that what was alleged to be shells looked a bit too thick to me. I certainly think the way that the sand has kind of sat in them is quite interesting. But another thought that came to my mind when looking at that particular image is if they were just fresh eggshells, they would have, and they were organic matter, they would have decayed. And I understand that fossilized eggshells are quite rare. They don't find many of them. So I don't know, maybe there's another explanation for this image, but the image itself is still quite interesting.
All right. And you would normally find eggshells in groups of 2 or 3.
It couldn't be a fossilised egg shell. No way.
No.
It wouldn't survive in that shape above ground. It would have to be in something to be fossilised.
Very thin, calcium-based shell.
Exactly.
Wouldn't survive any sort of dampness. It wouldn't survive any sort of a wind erosion, water erosion.
I mean, I don't know if an Arctic lemming has a particularly thick egg because of the environment.
It doesn't have an egg. It's a mammal.
Sorry, not a mammal. An Arctic. What kind of?
I don't know what sort of reptiles would survive in the Arctic because they're cold-blooded, so they wouldn't really be able to. I don't think.
Well, they must have birds.
They have birds. Yes. They have birds. Correct. So
Puffin.
Puffin. There you go.
How thick is a puffin egg?
I think penguin's probably a better bet. Penguins
live in the Antarctic.
Okay. Well, puffin, maybe. Yeah, I see your point. Those previous images are very odd looking to me.
They just don't look like eggs at all.
They don't look like eggs, but they don't look like natural rock formations either.
And they're too
Let's
close
be quite
together.
frank here.
They're too close together.
To have a hollowed out shape like that with a rounded top.
And both of them in the same picture.
In the same vicinity. Now, obviously, like we've seen in previous photos, we don't know their size. We can't determine whether that's the size of a small pebble or the size of an egg. So, we can only go by what we're shown. Again, perception is the key here. But they're very odd, I must say. And they don't look like something you'd find on Mars.
You don't think there's an Arctic duck-billed platypus?
Perhaps not. But
I just don't understand it, because how you could have two objects that share so much in terms of properties in the same picture like that. It almost looks like it's the same thing that's been blown to bits.
It's very odd. It doesn't conform to anything I can pass comment on with any knowledge.
I mean, the only thing that I could think of it could be is it's really from Mars and it's some kind of...
It's a Martian egg.
A Martian alien egg.
Yeah, a Martian Easter egg is where we can leave that one.
Because what else would need to be that thick? Because it'd have to be that thick to survive the air pressure.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But then when the animal, it would just explode because of the higher pressure inside. All the matter would go everywhere. There'd be no...
Yeah. Vaporise the actual animal itself as it was born.
The animal would vaporize.
Yeah.
That's not very useful discussion.
We've got 2 there, and they certainly look elliptical in shape rather than round.
Yes.
And it appears that in the top one, that part of the object, whatever it is broken off. The broken piece appears to be lying beside it.
Yes.
Which is what a hatched egg might look like.
Yes, but I mean, I would argue that it might have been an egg-shaped object, so that was an inorganic object, perhaps, which we seem to have several examples of in other images.
And Douglas Gibson has done a calculation of the size on that particular object, and he reckons it's about just over 4 centimetres in length, which he's saying is consistent with certain types of eggs.
Yes.
Now, this is an image which was in the previous hypothesis, which was alleged to look like lichen, which is this sort of fungus-type stuff which grows on rocks.
Yes.
Now, what one of the scientists points out here is that if you look at that image there, you've got quite a regular circle around the central anomaly, and then further out you've got another circle. And what that's created by is an instrument on the Mars rover called the Mossbauer spectrometer. So this is a metal plate with a hole in it, a circular metal plate, which pushes down onto the surface, and it leaves the central piece in place. That has then been photographed at a later time by the microscopic imager. So the regular circular shape there has been made by the rover itself.
Right.
So really, all you're interested in is the pattern, not the fact that it's grown or appears to have grown in a circular way. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can ignore that. So you're just looking at the surface texture, and what the scientist said was that, well, that's just the surface texture of rock or sand or soil or something like that. All right.
Yes.
So he's asserting that he's explained what that image is, but he admits that it does look a bit like lichen. Okay, but I've left it in there in the hypothesis there because I still think it's strong enough to be left in.
Yes, I would agree with you. I think that it does look like lichen. The pattern of the sort of the little individual strands or tendrils or whatever you would call them with lichen does match the terrestrial image.
Right, now the next section I've added, which is evidence of microbial life. Now people might say, well, this doesn't suggest that the rovers are on the Earth, because there might be microbial life on Mars. It might be suggesting that there is microbial life on Mars, and I'm open to that. Now, I've mentioned the labelled release experiment. Now, you know a little bit about that, Andrew. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, well, this experiment that was designed by Dr. Gilbert Levin, and it was flown, or allegedly flown, on the Viking 1 and 2 missions. And basically what it did was there was a mechanical arm dug into the soil on Mars, drew back the soil into the lander, deposited the dust in some type of dish, which was actually had some sugars in a sugary solution, and the sugar was laced with radioactive carbon, that's carbon-14, and the experiment was that if there were any bacteria in this dust, that they should metabolize the sugars in this solution, and then they would give off carbon dioxide. But because these sugars were radioactively doped with carbon-14, then the radioactive detector would detect radioactive carbon dioxide. And indeed, this experiment did detect radioactive carbon dioxide being given off. So the only way that could happen was by the sugary solution being metabolized by bacteria in the soil.
And on both of the landers, it produced the same result for the first 2 experiments. And then, strangely, in later experiments, it didn't.
Yes, indeed. And there were other experiments, such as the pyrolytic release, which David Darling has done a good description of, which also produced a positive result for microbial life. Yeah. And then there was a third experiment, which was I forget the name of this third experiment, which I think it was some type of gas chromatogram or something, and that produced a negative result. But according to what David Darling said in one of his talks, they knew that experiment didn't work even before it got to Mars, because they tested it on Earth, and even on Earth it had failed to detect.
So we think then that wherever the Viking landers were, there probably was...
I mean, call me negative if you like, but surely you'd have tested it on Earth before you put it into the spaceship.
And have a crowd of people hurrah as the test worked.
I mean, surely you wouldn't have built it, put it on the spaceship,
and hoped for the best,
and then sent it, and then taken the duplicate one outside. Maybe they were just up against the deadline, and they had no... It was in the original plan, and they just had to get on with it.
Well, you sound like a NASA scientist trying to make an excuse for them.
Well, what I mean is, if you've already planned the payload weight and the design and everything, and then when they actually make the thing, it doesn't work, you can't suddenly change everything else. So maybe they just had to leave it in there. Yeah. So it's not impossible, I suppose, is it?
No.
Either way, it is fascinating that both the other tests, first time round, produced positive results, and then every time after that they didn't work.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? I mean, how? Let's just talk about for a second. If you were trying to make,
surely they would have been rigorous on the first 2.
No, but hang on.
Because this is the first time it's being tested. So,
But let's just say that you're like the chief bloke there, and the most important thing is that they don't detect life, right? And all the tests they do are detecting life. What do you start saying to people to make it happen again? Because presumably when your boss says to you, "Oh, do it with less of this in," you have to do that.
Yeah.
You can't just say, "Well, that'll give a negative result," because
Yeah.
you're going to start being
you'll be booted out the door because you're not towing the party line.
Exactly. So presumably it's not that hard, to get them, persuade them to do stuff that will basically sabotage the mission. But it just seems so weird.
But yeah, what's normal about this whole situation? There's too many questions, isn't there? Still, I mean, the first two tests. Imagine if you are the scientist to design that test, and the pride you'd feel. Like my experiment is going to Mars to test for life. Surely the thoughts and preparation to put that experiment on the ship and they must have tested it so many times, and they must have tested it for things that were absolutely negative, that they knew would give negative results. I don't understand. I mean, obviously there's a possibility that it could have got corrupted somehow between launch and it landing. Perhaps. I don't know. But yeah, let's carry on.
Microbes in the soil.
I would say yes.
You would say that, yeah.
Yes.
Now, later lander, the Phoenix lander, took images which have been put into a sequence of the soil, and they appear to show little mites or something crawling about.
Correct, yes, very interesting, that one, and I've shown this at a few of the talks I've given. People that have seen those might remember that. And Ron Bennett, he did a very interesting sort of experiment of his own, in that he put a lot of these images from the Phoenix lander into a time-lapse sequence. So he was able to see this apparent movement of these particles, it does seem to be consistent with the speed and the type of movement that a small bug made. And he got that. He was interviewed on CNN, this Ron Bennett chap, but he didn't work for NASA. He was an amateur researcher. So again, why weren't NASA making their own time-lapse videos? It's very strange.
What I've said in the hypothesis is Ron Bennett, because Mars has such a hostile environment which only certain types of life similar to life on Earth would be able to survive. So it has to be very hardy life that's going to survive on Mars that we're going to find. So he suggests that it's perhaps one of these tardigrades, which they've tested in zero gravity and this kind of thing, and they've got this extremely robust design whereby they can withstand extreme temperatures and very little oxygen and all this sort of stuff. So this is why he's plumped for that, and possibly also the shape of it.
Yes.
But discussed this with Douglas Gibson, and he says, well, there's a whole load of, there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of different types of soil mites, right, which could also be in that image. And are far more common on the Earth. So is this not just a very, very common soil mite found on the Earth, rather than the exotic tardigrade suggested by the other chap who believes the craft is on Mars?
Indeed,
so if you bring the craft to the Earth, there's a far more simple explanation for that evidence. That's what we're suggesting.
Right. And it's worth mentioning that the Phoenix lander was only functioning, I think, for about 6 months before they lost contact with it. So that again is rather, fortunate or unfortunate, depending on which way you look at it.